everyone for being here today and joining us for our second breakout session. So we are in the innovation track for this session, and we have two speakers today, Alan Foster and then Dave Stewart. And Paul and Alan, so thank you, both of you, for joining us online. And Alan completed his undergraduate in biosystems engineering at Clemson University and served in the Peace Corps Water Program from 2005 to 2007, living and working with the indigenous populations of Panama. So Alan returned to Panama in 2010 to continue his development work with a focus on wash and renewable energy sectors. And he currently serves as Panama Country Director and Chair of the Board of Directors of SoleaWater, a nonprofit, while he's residing in Eastern Panama with his family. And he is also currently pursuing a master's degree in applied international development at Arizona State University. And I believe he is joining us today from Panama. And we'll be running a video that he pre-recorded due to possible Wi-Fi connection issues. So we'll be watching a video that he's pre-recorded. But he is online with Langdon Hollingsworth to answer questions. Okay. Thank you.
I think some of us folks on Zoom are having trouble hearing.
What implications does this have for Rotary, or those of us that are working with Rotary? One of the main ways I would like to encourage people is to escape from a project mentality. And what do I mean by that? It's super common and understandable that we think of projects and timelines and budgets. And that's fair. It would be really hard to have expectations between donors and implementing organizations without those. And yet, if we think about water systems and we think about the word development and its implications of time and relationship, when we transpose a project mentality onto a relationship, what we end up with is the question everyone asks, right? That's, when is the project going to be finished? Or when is the water system going to be finished? And I love that question because I always respond in the same way. Never. A water system is never finished. No water system in any country in the world. We're always making improvements and innovations, new technologies develop. There's always a need for continuing ed. And for us to back away to the extent possible from the project mentality and focus on a permanent relationship, I think is one really, really productive direction for us to go as organizations. When I look at the history of rural infrastructure development, say in the US, I'm struck by the huge role of nonpartisan civic institutions like cooperatives and utility districts, which continue to be vital today. And what I've come to realize is that Panama, like Afghanistan, is challenged by a sort of institutional vacuum necessary for WASH development, and particularly in the rural indigenous lands. This leaves a gap in the social capital, and that gap tends to be fertile ground for distrust and even corruption. And the gap in Panama has kept small communities from access to banking services, timely technical support, oversight of capital expenses, and other things vital to sustainable development in the WASH sector. So here in Panama, the Solea team, we're building a regional cooperative to bridge this gap. And it fills the institutional vacuum of the three-pillared system like developed in the US, where you have, number one, the regulatory agency, which tends to be the government or the Ministry of Health in the case of Panama, the consumer, which is the local villager, and then what we lack here in Panama currently, the nonpartisan civic institution that can help a village interact with its government. And so maybe you're asking yourself, well, I thought that was the role of the local water committee. And maybe I would respond with a question, well, in the case of rural Panama, why hasn't that worked well in the last 40 years? So I would offer that while we can't underestimate the importance or understate the importance of quality infrastructure and WASH education, we also cannot neglect the importance of building social capital in the form of contextually appropriate local civic institution. And that just takes a lot of time. So joining me for the Q&A is a dear friend and colleague, Langdon Hollingsworth, who's doing his postgrad at Harvard's Kennedy School for International Development. And we would love to hear any suggestions or questions that you might have. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alan. Are you able to hear us all right?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. So thank you very much for that presentation. It's very inspiring, and especially looking at the context of social capital and innovation and perspective. So I'd like to open it up for questions for people in the room or online. So we'll start maybe with the room. If there's anybody that has a question, or Alan. Any questions online?
Yeah, and I apologize to everyone. It seems that for the most of the first part of the presentation that the online audience wasn't able to hear the audio, so they weren't able to get a lot of it. Joining us here is my colleague Langdon Hollingsworth, and what I failed to mention is that he spent the better part of 2 years and continues to work with us, building a relationship alongside of us. He's also a Rotarian based out of Roswell, Georgia. And there were some pieces that I wanted to add. I didn't know how much time we would be allotted afterwards. But it's been really interesting thinking about Dr. Tusu, I believe it's Dr. Tusu's presentation in the morning, who touched on ways that we need to shift in our thinking and making assumptions. And one area that seemed really important to me is our assumptions on communication. And so a little anecdote from Langdon's life and time down here. One thing that we saw in that quote from Major Jim Gant was about identifying people with a special ability, intercultural abilities to develop rapport and deepen relationship quickly. And I certainly saw that during Langdon's time down here. In fact, after I guess about a year, he had made such deep relationships that one of our local partners named a baby after him. And so I thought about that and thought, wow, he was so successful that he had a baby named after him. And that testifies to the deepness of the relationship he made. At the same time, nobody told him about it, testifying to the shallowness of the relationship that he made. And we found that is really, really insightful in terms of what it means to work with Indigenous communities. And when I think about what do we need to fix a broken water system, which is a process that's plagued many organizations where we can set up infrastructure, but it fails. And I was just reflecting on the fact that the first thing we need to know is that the water system is broken. And that's something that we take for granted, particularly in Indigenous contexts where communication barriers, which are ultimately cultural barriers, can be quite challenging for an outside organization to deal with.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. And Landon, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Maybe you could give us a little bit of insight into that experience that Alan was talking about and what you felt maybe were some of the successful approaches that you used in developing relationships.
Yeah. First, thanks for having me. This was really great. Really excited to be here. Really, really glad to be able to share. I would say to Alan's anecdote, I think what allowed me to kind of build relationships decently quickly there in Panama was really kind of a focus on the people, just as much or more than the work itself. I had been a part of other organizations in the past before coming and living with Alan and being in Panama, where kind of the work was really the central focus of the organization. Building the water project, right? Digging the well, installing the pipes, giving the filters, so to speak. But I found that while the work obviously is important, right? And you can't have clean water without that infrastructure. Investing time in the relational component is arguably just as important, or if not more important, because without that relational component, without that trust and that knowledge that you're gonna be there for them and help them, and the system won't last. In every, I can't think of a case, and I can't think of an example where someone or a group has installed a water system, left, and everything went really smoothly. So I think for me, what helped me build these kind of deep relationships with people was an emphasis on the person just as much as the water system. And I will say I didn't come up with that. I really learned that from Alan, who is not only a great friend but an incredible mentor of mine. And his decision to live in Panama and really be there with these people day in and day out inspiring to me, and I was trying to follow in his footsteps. So anyway.
Well, thank you so much for that. I'm just going to go back and see if there's any more questions from the audience. Yes.
So, under the category of best practices in establishing the personal relationships. Do you have a checklist of things that are mandatory? That is, eat the same food, live in the same house, participate in the community in some manner, things like that.
Yeah, checklist for best practices. Yeah, the one I would add to that, and I think you've got a great list going already, would be our starting point is we never go anywhere where we're not invited. So we started with one village, and after that success, we were invited to another and then another, and now we can't meet all the invitations we have. And so that has been a really, really good filter for us in determining who we're going to invest our time with.
I would say, from my perspective too, to add on to what Alan was saying, something that I found really impactful when I was living there in Panama was that whenever we would go to a village to work on a project, we always would stay in the home of someone there. So we had an invitation to come to the villages themselves, but we also made sure to have, personal invitations to stay in someone's house. And I think that component of trust, saying, listen, like we're willing to, stay in your house and eat the same food, just like you were saying, sir, is really mission critical. Because I think it just puts everybody on the same playing field, that they don't see us as we're any better. We're all on the same page, and we all have we're able to work together as a team to achieve the same goal. So.
Great. We have time for one more question. Yes.
So when you communicate with these indigenous communities, do they speak English? Because I know English is first language in Panama, but I'm assuming they probably don't.
The question was, do the people speak English?
These indigenous communities.
Yeah, so their first language is, Panama has 7 different tribes, and each has their own language that has no relation to the Romantic languages whatsoever. They're quite difficult and use lots of sounds that require muscles, which we lose the ability to use when we are babies. So different guttural, and one of them has 13 vowels. Panama's national language is Spanish, and most of indigenous, except for the most elderly at this point, have received Spanish in the public school system. And so they actually speak it quite well, because and easier for someone who's not a native speaker, because they enunciate well and their vocabulary and expression tends to be less colloquial. So like a Latino Spanish in Panama sounds like Highlands Appalachia. It's quite fast and hard to understand, whereas the indigenous tribes are very, very good at Spanish on the whole.
Well, thank you both very much again, Alan and Madeline, for joining us today. That was a very informative talk and really inspiring, especially thinking about this sort of area of social capital and social innovation. So really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. And could I finish with a quote from Sister Lorraine Lauter that we just heard from earlier? I love this. She said, "Without a strong human solution, technology will be vulnerable." And I think that's brilliant. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.